Today I'm going to be using an Indian Bollywood sample to make a beat. Along the way I'm going to show you some cool sampling techniques, 808 tricks, arrangement ideas to turn your loop into a full beat, and a lot more. So let's get into it. Now right off the bat, I will say that I don't typically use Indian samples. And the reason why is because, well, you know what? I don't want to get into it right now. Let's just say that some weird things start to happen when I use these samples. Anyways, let's go ahead and find a sample first. Now when you're using these samples to make beats, there are a lot of different approaches that you can take. Right now I'm just looking for a sample that has some cool, unique instrumentation, sounds that you wouldn't typically hear from a more common jazz or soul type of sample. That's an alright sample. This sounds like a good starting point. Let's go ahead and start chopping this sample up. Now, as you can see from the waveform itself, we have a pretty dense sample here. And if you watched any of my previous sampling videos, you know that I often advocate for using thinner samples because it can make manipulating them a lot more easy. Here, we don't have that option really. There definitely are some cool sounds that I want to use though, especially in the beginning of this sample. I like that main wind instrument, but as you can hear, there's just a lot of other instrumentation all over it. I could try to EQ it out and isolate some of the sounds, but instead I'm going to use another sampling trick that I don't really see much people using. What I'm going to do is zoom in on this waveform and just try to find a brief little moment where all the other instruments aren't playing and we're just left with that one instrument that I do like. So it looks like right here, we have that one instrument playing and everything else becomes pretty quiet overall. So I brought my chop over here and now what I'm going to do is really slow this sample down. As you can hear, the sound quality of this sample does start to get a little bit worse, a little bit grainy. I will say that Serato sample probably has one of the best time stretch features out there. If I tried to do this in a more basic sampler, it probably would have sounded a lot worse. But what I'm going to do now that I have this instrument isolated is I'm going to turn the keyboard feature on. And now I can use this sound as an instrument to create my own pattern. I'll probably have to clean this sound up with some effects, but first let's build a pattern out. Alright, so this is sounding pretty good to me, so hey, get out of here! I'm not a snake charmer, you racist snake! Why does this keep happening when I use Indian samples? Sorry about that. Anyways, like I mentioned, we have some ugly tones in this sound that need cleaning up. Let's go ahead and use an EQ to do just that. Alright, so after doing some EQing, this is what we're left with. Now I do have a decision to make. We can hear that we have our actual instrument in the higher frequencies over here. But we also have this weird tone in the lower end of the frequency spectrum. Now I could definitely EQ this tone out just so we're left with that instrument in the higher end, but for now I'm going to go ahead and see how this beat comes together if I just keep this tone in. It might end up being useful in filling up space in the frequency spectrum in almost this hidden way. I might have to cut this region out later depending on what I add into this beat, but for now, let's just keep it and go on. I'm also going to add some delay to this sound just so it fills up more space and also gives it a more natural feeling. Right now this sound feels a bit manufactured and digital in a way. But after adding some delay. And finally, I think it'd be a good idea to add some vibrato onto the sound. Here I'm using Vibrato, which is a free plugin from Melda. They actually have a whole pack of free effects that you can just check out. I end up using a lot of these free plugins pretty often, primarily because I'm a cheapskate. So what vibrato is doing here is playing with the pitch of the sound and it's making it fluctuate very slightly. The reason why I thought this would be a good idea is because without this, we get a very constant, stagnant sound. And when we get to these longer notes in the pattern here, it especially starts to sound unnatural with how constant and uniform it stays. So here, adding some type of modulation to the sound and bringing some change to it over time can help bring a little bit more movement and again, a little bit more liveliness because I want the sound to feel a little bit more real. So after all those effects, this is what we get. is sounding good to me so far. Let's figure out what else we can pull from the sample to create yet another layer in this beat. So I'm going to duplicate this sample out and just start to scour and look for what else I can find here. These two chops here create a pretty cool percussion loop. I think that's something that I want to add into this beat. I like the idea of it being a little bit more percussive and rhythmic. It sounds pretty weak right now, so let's go ahead and use some effects. To help it be a little bit more rhythmic, I'm going to use some of my experimental plugins. First, I'm going to use Segment, which is always great for reinventing sounds. I've talked about this plugin a bunch. It's my go-to right now for manipulating my sounds and patterns and really reshaping them. Alright, this preset's pretty insane. I really love the rhythm that it adds into the beat, and the texture itself just sounds so much more unique now. Now, having said that, this sound probably takes up a little bit too much space in the beat in its current form. As much as I love how this sounds, I am going to need to do some reducing here. First, I'm going to get rid of some of those booming subby frequencies here. My plan is to add my own bass into the beat eventually, so I don't need these frequencies. And I want to boost the tones in the sample that really help emphasize that rhythm in this loop. I really like this weird part of the sample, probably over here. It almost sounds like a muffled vocal or something, really unique, so I'm going to go ahead and boost that. But right next to this tone is this annoying dripping sound almost. I don't like this, so I'm going to cut that out as much as I can without affecting the part of the sample that I do like, which happens to be pretty close to it. And next, I'm going to add some reverb onto this sound so it becomes a bit more secondary in the beat. So here is what we get. Really cool rhythmic layer here. I think this sounds good so far. Not again. This is the last time I use Indian samples. Alright, so like I mentioned before, I do want to add my own bass into the beat. I'm thinking maybe an 808. In terms of an 808 pattern, I actually sort of like the bass pattern from our loop before we EQ'd it. It's very simple but effective. I really like that driving energy. So as a starting point, I think I'm going to recreate that pattern in this beat. But first, let's go ahead and find an adequate 808. I like this one, has a bit of color to it and some nice low end as well. To get this extra juicy, I'm going to slap some decapitator onto it. Now I'm just going to replicate that same pattern from the sample. This sounds cool, but I think it can use a little bit more musicality. Playing the same note over and over again doesn't really make for the most exciting listening experience right now. So let's add an extra note at the end here, maybe some fun slides as well. I'll add some extra notes here as well. This is sounding better, but having said that, I do think a problem here is that this might become a bit unbearable. This is a lot of bass, so I think what I'll have to do is save this pattern for later, maybe for the hook section when I arrange the beat out. For the verse pattern, I'm going to create something that's a bit more minimal that will help introduce more space into the beat. To do this, what I'll do is add in some extra notes, but at a very low velocity. And since cut itself is on, now that we get to this next note right here, the 808 will stop playing. Next, I'm going to get rid of these notes up here and also add this stop note over here. I think it might be a cool idea to chop this 808 into 2 notes here. But to make this note a little bit more sexy, I'm going to have it start 1 semitone higher and then have it slide downwards. I'm also going to control the velocity of this slide note here. For those that don't know, adjusting the velocity of a slide note controls what volume it will be once we reach the end of the slide note. So now instead of having these 2 notes sound like this, where it isn't as perceivable that we even have 2 notes, by using these tricks, our notes will start to sound a little bit more distinguishable. not a huge game changer by any means, just a small little detail. Overall though, this is sounding good so far. Let's go ahead and create a drum pattern now. I'm just going to build something trap-esque, nothing too fancy here. So here with my hi-hat pattern, I've built something that's a little bit more rhythmically different. I think using a straightforward 8th note pattern might not make for the most engaging listen with what I've built so far. I just wanted to introduce a little bit more rhythmic variation in my beat. I'm also going to grab another hi-hat and create some cool stutters here and there. Next we have our kick pattern. And our snares. Alright, I got the bones of my beat here, so far so good. I do want to add a few more layers just to create a bit more diversity here. Like I mentioned before, I like the idea of making this beat a little bit more rhythmic, a little bit more percussive, so I'm going to go ahead and jump into my Percussion Loop folder and add something from there. So I think using shakers in this beat might be a good idea. What I'm going to do is just bring this into Fruity Slicer. Not because I want to chop it up and rearrange it or anything. I just use Fruity Slicer for my percussion and drum loops just because it can quickly and easily restructure loops to fit your beat's BPM. I think another percussive layer could really help fill the beat out. Let's see what else we have here. I think this loop here sounds great. I like the rhythm that it adds into the beat. So let's just do the exact same thing and add it into Fruity Slicer. I do think this loop here is a little bit bright though, just a personal preference here. I typically don't like my beats sounding this bright and clean. So what I'm going to do is pitch shift this loop and bring the frequency range of this loop down a bit. So I think this beat's pretty full so far. I do want to add in a couple more layers though, just to use throughout my arrangement. This is the process of subtractive arrangement, when you build everything at the start, and then when you arrange, you reduce instead of add. This is something that I covered many moons ago in a video that is showing up on the screen right now in case you're interested. So let's duplicate the sample out and see what other layers we can find in here. Later on in the sample, we have this more open area with some more isolated instruments. I think this could be a good resource. So let's see if we can figure out a way to use something from here in the beat. This texture here might work, but as of right now, it's pretty large. I don't really need anything quite as robust. I just want to use this more as an additional small layer in the beat. So with that in mind, let's use some tools to reduce how present the sound is. First, I'll use EQ to really constrict what space the sound takes up. Next, I'm going to add some delay and reverb onto the sound. Again, my intention with this layer is for it to be a little bit more secondary, so pushing it back into the beat will help here. Now I'm just going to create this small little riff at the end of the loop. Nothing crazy here. As you can hear, it's not very prominent. This is just a layer of detail that I'll play throughout the beat every once in a while. Let's see if we can add something else into this beat that can also come in and out during the arrangement. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate the sample out again and see what else I can find here. In fact, let's see how this sound here sounds if I drastically repitch it way down. That could be a good idea. This doesn't sound all that great, but I think if I were to EQ it pretty drastically and add some delay as well, this could be a cool little sound to add, like a little tiny stab throughout the pattern here. Alright, so I have a ton of layers to work with. Let's go ahead and arrange this beat out. A few things that I want to point out with the final beat here. I ended up duplicating the main loop and creating an alternate pattern. You can see the second bar of both of these patterns are a bit different from each other. I did this just so there's a bit more variation in the beat. For those that don't know, to duplicate a pattern, just click here and select Make Unique. And now this will keep your original pattern intact while also creating an alternate version of the pattern that you can go in and change around as you see fit. Another thing to point out throughout the beat, as you can see, I cut a bunch of these patterns up. And some of my course members didn't know this, so I might as well repeat it here. If you want to quickly and easily make cuts in your pattern, just hover the cursor over wherever you want to make the cut and just hit Insert on your keyboard. And this lets me cut parts of my pattern a lot more easily. This is especially helpful if you want to play around with the rhythm of some of your patterns. You can see later in this beat here. I did this exact thing with my kick pattern. So what I did was I just went into this actual full pattern, cut one of the kicks out, deleted the entire remaining pattern, and from here I just held down Shift and I easily duplicated this kick out to create something a little bit more rhythmically different. This saves me from having to go all the way into the pattern, duplicating it out, and creating something entirely new in the piano roll. I can just do it all from this playlist window here. During the hook, like I mentioned, I used that more dense 808 pattern. I also added that crash on top to really bring up the energy level. And you probably heard it as well, I added this little Indian vocal sample. Anyways, I've talked enough. I'll go ahead and play the full beat for you. And by the way, if you're looking for some more learning and you need some help with sampling, check out the video in the corner. I know a lot of people struggle with learning how to sample better, and this video is one of my more helpful videos on the topic. If you enjoyed this video though, like and subscribe. Head over to betterbeatmaker.com if you want to check out my full online beatmaking course. My free drum kit's available in the description box below, as well as a link to my Discord if you want to join my producer community. And without further ado, here's the full beat.